So how many of us have ever been victims of something before? All right, like whether we've been bullied before, whether we had something stolen from us before, whatever it is. Okay, so we have people that have been some victims. So one day I was at work and I received a call from my mom, and she had called me to tell me that someone had broken into her house and stole some stuff. And so I left work immediately and I went to my mom's house to go check on her and my dad. And physically they were okay, but emotionally they were both hurt, they were angry, and they were frustrated. I mean, I get it. They were victims of something, right? Their stuff had been stolen, so I get that they felt that way. But it wasn't long before they started to blame some people for what had just happened. You know, it wasn't long before my mom started to blame my past friends and blame them that maybe it was your old friends that came in here and did this. And it wasn't long before she started to blame the neighbors and accuse them for breaking into her house. And then my dad, he started to blame the mailman as the mailman walked up to deliver our mail, or their mail rather. He blamed him for being in on it. Then there was an ADT guy who was walking across the street looking for business in the neighborhood. And my dad called him over. Hey, come here. My dad called him over and blamed him for the reason why they got their house broken into and their stuff stolen. He blamed this guy and yelled at him and scared him so bad that this guy offered my dad a sweet deal on ADT service and offered him all kinds of free window sensors. I think my dad was kind of genius in that. He had a motive, all right, guys? But see, what was happening is my parents were defensive and they were blaming people because in that moment they were victims of something. And see, I wasn't living with them at this time. In fact, me and Selena were already married, and so we were living in another city 30 minutes away. But something interesting happened. I began to blame people too. You know, in that moment, I started to blame others for what had happened to my parents. I started to blame people as they came up offering help, like, hey, this is what we saw. I started to blame them and accuse them of being in on it. I started to blame others and say, hey, man, you were jacking my parents. I know you were. And I started to blame people for what had happened to my parents. And get this, nothing had even happened to me. Nothing had even happened to me in that moment, yet I was blaming them like I was a victim. I had a victim mind in that moment. So what is a victim mind, you might ask? A victim mind is where you often feel like a victim, even when the evidence says otherwise. What was the evidence? The evidence was that none of my stuff got stolen. My house didn't get broken into. That's the evidence. But yet, I went against that evidence and started to feel like a victim and blame some people. How many of us have done that before? When something really didn't happen to us, yet we're blaming somebody and we're not taking personal responsibility for what has happened. And we begin to point the blame at others. And some of the signs of a victim mind are this. If I get the next slide. The signs include frequently blaming others, being defensive, and having trouble accepting personal responsibility. See, this is what a victim mind is. This is what a victim mind is, and in that moment, I was blaming people. I didn't accept the personal responsibility, which is none of my stuff was stolen. I was all good. We were all good. But yet I was quick to blame the neighbors. I was quick to blame people that were offering help, and I was defensive towards anybody that came around. And nothing had even happened to me. So how is it that a victim mind is developed? I got another slide for you guys. We develop a victim mind from the past trauma of facing negative circumstances and having our trust betrayed. How many of you guys have ever faced some negative circumstances before? Right? All of us, right? How many of us have ever been betrayed or felt betrayed by somebody, right? All of us. See, when it comes to relationships, we might have a past betrayal because of someone. And so when we enter into these current relationships, we might have a hard time of keeping them because we feel like a victim in that current circumstance when something has happened to us in the past. And so we bring that past victim mind into our current relationships and we begin to push people away when things don't seem right. See, maybe you face a negative circumstance. Maybe you're like my parents and you actually had something stolen from you. And now you feel like a victim. I get that. I get those feelings. I've had something stolen from me too. Maybe all you've heard in life is no. And there's a fear and a defensive to try something new. because you don't want to hear no again. Church, I get that. I get those no's. I get that fear, and I get that defensiveness. Years before I had gotten saved, I used to be involved in a gang, and and if you guys are law enforcement in here, don't bust me. Just playing. It was past, okay? I'm a pastor now, guys. But years before I had gotten saved, I was in a gang, and in that gang, I ended up catching a felony for something I committed, a crime I committed, and I got a felony. Now, for those who know anything about a felony, is it stays on your background, and it makes it really hard to get a good job, right? And so as I had this felony, I was already married now. Now I was saved, and we had a family, and so I'm trying to look for a better job to better our life. And so as I'm going to these places to apply, I'm going to these great companies, and I'm doing great in the interview. They like my background, or they like my experience, my work experience, but each time they go to check the background, it's a no. Felonies popped up. Can't hire you. So then I move on to the next company, which is also a great company, and then I go through that whole process again, do good in the interview, they like my work experience, and then what? They check the background? No. And I kept hearing no after no after no. And it got to the point that one of the final times that I went on this interview, everything was good. They even told me how much I was going to be getting paid, what would be my start date. They're like, we just got to do your background check, and then this will be your start date. And as soon as they told me that, I'm like, all right, well, peace, nice knowing you. Because I already knew what was going to happen. I had a victim mind because of these past circumstances. And all of these no's that I kept hearing, I knew what was going to happen. And so I get the no. But see, this is the thing, church. When we don't deal with the trauma of these experiences, we'll default to blaming others and not accepting personal responsibility. And this will affect our relationships and how we view life. See, in my own life, I didn't work through these issues right away. I spent a lot of time feeling that others were to blame for my current circumstance. And I was defensive towards people. Nobody could tell me anything because these walls went up and you weren't getting through. And I was defensive. See, how many of us are doing this today? How many of us blame others for something? We blame others for a circumstance that we're currently in. How many of us have failed to accept personal responsibility for something and really to look at these things? Because every time that we blame somebody for something, there's always three fingers pointed back at us. And it's those three fingers that we really need to pay attention to. I blamed my past gang for the reason why I had the felony. I blamed my parents. I even blamed God. But in reality, it was me. I was the one that committed that crime. I caught that felony. I chose to make that decision, and it was on me. And yet I had failed to take that personal responsibility. See, when we blame others, it could keep us stuck and stop us from growing in our marriages because we want to blame our spouse and marriages begin to fall apart. It'll keep us stuck and stop us from growing in relationships with others because anytime something happens that doesn't feel right, we begin to push people away and we become offended. It'll keep us from growing in ministry because we can't come under the leadership and receive constructive criticism because it feels like an attack on us. We won't be able to grow at work and get promotions because we can't accept anything that the boss wants to tell us. We're defensive towards everything, and everything feels like an attack. And it'll even affect our relationship with God. See, the Bible says that we are more than conquerors through Christ Jesus who saved us. A conqueror is a victor, and we can't have a victor mind with a victim mind. The two don't go. It's one or the other, church. And so we need to forego that victim mind and embrace this victor's mind. See, church, you're not alone in feeling this way. In fact, many of us feel this way whether we admit it or not. But there is freedom from this mindset. We need victory in our thoughts. And how do we do it? We need to look to Jesus. We need to look to Jesus to get victory. See, in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, it says this. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So what is this verse telling us? That there is a mindset that Jesus has that you and I need to possess. See, now, Jesus is a very, very deep person. There's chapters after chapters and books of instruction that Jesus has given. So he's very deep. But one of the many strengths that Jesus possesses is a victor's mind. And it's this mind that is in Jesus that you and I need to have to do away with the victim mind for good, to stop blaming people, to accept personal responsibility and stop being defensive. We need to put on this victor's mind, church. If not, we're going to continue to go through life blaming people, not accepting responsibility, and end up ruining relationships with people. We'll end up ruining relationships with people and not really see the helping hand that was extended towards us. We're going to smack it away because of a victim mind. How many times have we done that when somebody wants to help? We're like, man, I don't want your help. That's exactly what I was doing when people were coming to my parents' house, offering their help. I was smacking it away and accusing them. It was your fault. See, the victim mind will do this, church. See, Jesus had a victor's mind. And if anybody had the right to be a victim, it was Jesus. He was called names that weren't true about him. Accusations were made against him that were false. He was rejected by people that were closest to him. Has anybody here ever experienced rejection like that? He was abandoned in his time of need, and a lot of us have some abandonment issues that we're working through. And get this, he was punished for sins that he didn't commit. If anybody had the right to act like a victim, it was Jesus. But through him, we have victory, church. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 57, it says this, "But thanks be to God who gives victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." So we need to understand where this victory comes from. But first, we need to understand that we have victory. Church, you and I have victory. In fact, say it. Say, I have victory. Okay, the worship team in the front row got it, but the rest of us, we need to embrace that. We need to really get that truth on the inside of us. I have victory. See, that victory is only coming from one source, and that's Jesus. It comes from no one else. Victory doesn't happen because our football team won today. No. Because the Rams could go out and lose, and that doesn't change anything. It doesn't change my relationship with Jesus. And if you're a Raiders fan, I'm sorry. I'm just playing with you guys. I love you guys. My dad's a Raiders fan, so it's all good. But we have victory through Jesus, guys. And thanks be to God that we don't have to stay with this victim mind. That today we have the opportunity to push away this victim mind and embrace the victory that Jesus died for us to have. Are you guys ready to do away with this victim mind? Come on, church, we need to start walking in some victory. Are you guys with me today? That's right. So we have victory through Jesus over this victim mind. So let's walk in victory and put on the victor's mind. As we look at the life of Jesus, there's two things that we could apply to our life today to really put on this victor's mind and do away with the blaming, do away with the defensiveness, and really start to live like some victors. I don't know about you guys, but when I play a game, I don't play it to lose. I'm competitive. I do jiu-jitsu, man. Like, I'm not rolling to lose. I'm rolling to trap somebody's arm or foot or something. I don't want to lose, okay? I want to be victorious. Does anybody want to be victorious in here? Right. Man, let's do it. All right. So when it comes to a victor's mind, the first thing that we need to do is love. We need to love one another. See, in a time of need and great trial, Jesus' followers had abandoned him. But yet Jesus chose to respond like a victor. His mind was set on loving the disciples. See, Jesus was arrested. And when he was arrested for crimes that he didn't commit, the people closest to him abandoned him, and then one of his closest friends and followers denied him. All right? And it's those people that he ends up going to one day. See, Jesus, after he was arrested, he was beaten, he died, and he resurrected. And when he resurrected, he made a few appearances. Jesus just popped up like, hey, what's up? Jesus made a few appearances, and one of those appearances was to his disciples one day. His disciples are out on the sea, and they're fishing. And as they're fishing, they're not catching anything. And if there's any fishermen in here, you know that when you don't catch anything, it gets pretty frustrating. And so they're fishing, they don't catch anything, and someone calls out to them from the shore, and they don't know it's Jesus at the time. But he calls out to them, and he tells them, hey, why don't you cast your nets to the side? And when they do, they end up getting this great big catch, a catch that is too big for them to sustain. And in that moment, Peter knew, he was like, it's the Lord. And so Peter hops out the boat and starts swimming to Jesus. He was that excited. The rest of the disciples were like, Peter, we're going to row in. So they started rowing in. And we pick up the story right there in John chapter 21, verse 9. It says this, and when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. See, Jesus, well, first of all, you could read this verse and miss some stuff that's happening. A casual read, you're like, okay, Jesus was cooking some breakfast. That's cool. Jesus is a grill master. But when you really look into what's happening, Jesus is teaching us about love right here. Because it's one thing to love someone, it's another thing to put action to that love. And Jesus, preparing a meal was his way of putting action to love. Jesus used this meal to show the disciples, hey, after you abandon me, our relationship is still good. I'm still going to love you through your faults. See, now, for me, as I read this, like God was really speaking to me because I have a backyard full of smokers, and I'm not talking about tweakers. I'm talking about barbecues. I have a backyard full of barbecues, all right? So don't go spreading rumors like, hey, Pastor Ruben has a backyard full of tweakers. I don't think he needs to be part of Hub City. Like, hey, don't go trying to get me kicked out. I have a backyard full of barbecues, all right? And so when I read this, it really spoke to me, and I thought to myself, how many times have I ever thrown a barbecue for someone I was offended at? How many times did I ever barbecue for someone that made me feel like a victim? You know, I didn't. And so I understood this challenge that Jesus was issuing us, is that it's one thing for us to say that we love somebody. It's another thing for us to show it and to put some action behind it. See, this right here, breakfast was waiting for them. Fish cooking over a charcoal fire with some bread. In my culture, that's carne asada and tortillas, guys. Man, am I right? And some salsa, especially Drew salsa. Man, I have never invited someone over for a Taco Tuesday that I felt wronged by. Like I never told Selena, like, hey, babe, can you help me clean up the house? I'm going to go ahead and have a barbecue for Jeremy. We're going to have some tacos. By the way, Jeremy's that guy that always blames stuff on me and, you know, he offends me. We're going to have a great time tonight. No, I've never done that. And you guys know you haven't either. That's why you guys aren't laughing. You're like, yeah, I haven't done that. See, but the thing about a victor's mind is it will go above and beyond to show people that they're loved. It'll go above and beyond to show people that they're loved, that there's no fault being held against them. And as we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7, we're going to pull out two things about love right here. I mean, all these verses are talking about love. So there's many things to learn, but there's two things within these verses about love that Jesus is really showing us in this example with the disciples. Verse 4 says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wrong. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. What is Jesus telling us through these verses right here about love? My next slide. Love keeps no record of being wronged, and it endures through every circumstance. Keeps no record of being wrong. This is what it means, that you're not tallying up somebody's mistakes and faults. You're not tallying them up, and we're not throwing them in their face like, hey, remember when you did this to me? Or remember when you didn't do this to me? Like, we're not tallying it up and throwing it back in people's faces. But also, love endures through every circumstance. What does that mean? The love provides a solid foundation to go through the good, the bad, and the ugly in life. Because when it comes to people, we're a fallen nature people. I mean, we make mistakes. It's just life. And so when we deal with people who make mistakes, which is every one of us, we're going to have some good. We're going to have some bad. And for sure, we're going to have some ugly. We're going to have some fail, like bad and some ugly, church. But love will endure through all of that. Love will provide the solid foundation to get through every circumstance. So we need to put action to our love. Don't just say the words. We need to be doers of the word and not hearers only, and put some action. So the question is this: who is it that we need to show some love to? Who is it? Maybe God has already shown you right now. Maybe God is putting their face, in your mind. Maybe he's giving you some names. Go ahead and write those names down. Who is it that you need to throw that barbecue for, so to speak? Okay, you got that name. We need to put some action to this love. And what does that look like? We show love by doing a kind gesture for someone. That's it. Show love by doing a kind gesture for someone. Maybe it is throwing a barbecue for somebody. Maybe it isn't. That's between you and God. But a kind gesture, remember, love is kind. A kind gesture is putting action to that love. Maybe it's slipping somebody a Starbucks gift card. Hey, I know you like cake pops. I'm going to hook you up. Okay? Maybe it's an In-N-Out gift card. Maybe it's something. Maybe it's helping somebody that really needs help right now. Maybe they're moving, they need work done around the house, so you go through and you help them out. You're putting some action to that love. You're not just saying, hey, I love you, and then, bam, walking the other way. No, we're putting some action to it. Showing a kind gesture for someone. So church, this week, there should be some kind gestures happening around here. Don't let this just be a message that you hear today like, hey, that's good, or I didn't like it, and then just go off doing life. No, let this message affect your tomorrow. Let it affect your week. Put it to practice. See, let's love people back to life, and let's love people through every circumstance and keep no record of their faults. Our second thing today, and our last point, when it comes to what a victor's mind is set on, is forgiveness. A victor's mind is set on forgiveness. And see, being victimized can lead us to holding on to grudges. And Jesus understood being victimized more than anybody. We already went through everything that Jesus endured. But let's go back and break it down again. See, Jesus, like I said earlier, was arrested. He was falsely accused. He was beaten by the Roman soldiers. And as they took him through the crowd, he was mocked by the people, mocked by the Roman soldiers, continued to get beat. He was stripped of his clothing, thrown and nailed on a cross like a criminal, and then he had his clothes gambled with. Can you imagine if that happened today? Like somebody just came up and took my Jordans off my feet and then just started to gamble them? That's jacked up. I'd be angry. Like, how do you treat me like this? It's so disrespectful, yet this is how Jesus was treated. Okay? Yet, we pick up the story right here and we find something so interesting that Jesus says. In Luke chapter 23, verses 33 through 34, it says, and when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Jesus was talking about the Roman soldiers. Jesus was talking about the crowd that had mocked him and falsely accused him. Jesus said he could have called down a legion of angels and done something to them. But Jesus chose to forgive them. Jesus chose to forgive them. Rather than feeling like a victim, Jesus chose to be a victor and forgive, because that's what a victor's mind is set on. It's set on forgiveness. A victor's mind is rooted in forgiveness. See, forgiveness was Jesus' whole mission. And our mind and our mission need to be rooted in forgiveness also. This will keep us healthy and allow us to live, think, and see things through a victor's mind. Our vision, how we see things, will no longer be distorted. So maybe you feel like someone has wronged you. Maybe it was someone in the church. Maybe it was a boss, a spouse, friend, whoever. Maybe somebody has wronged you. Extending forgiveness is the only way to make it right, be healthy, and have victory. Because unforgiveness will keep us stuck in a cycle of blaming others and not accepting responsibility. Church, we need to do away with the victim mind, and we need to accept responsibility. So the question is this: who do we need to forgive? I trust again that God is already speaking to you. He's showing you a list. He's showing you somebody. Who is it you need to forgive? If God is showing you somebody, write that down. Write that name down. And we need to put some action to it. See, if you've gone through our freedom course here, you know how to forgive people. You've been given the tools. You've been given the tools of letter writing, and use them, put them to practice. And if you haven't been through our freedom course, we're starting on October 1st. Get in there. We'll teach you how to forgive others. And you may even say something like, well, I'm not ready to forgive them. Ready has nothing to do with it. We forgive by faith, guys. Faith is the motivator behind that, not readiness. Maybe we need to seek forgiveness from someone, because forgiveness is twofold. Either we're forgiving someone or we're seeking forgiveness from someone. See, maybe we need to accept our part in how we made others feel when we blame them, and then make it right by seeking forgiveness. The Bible calls us to make things right with one another. Even if the relationship isn't going to be what it used to be, we still have to attempt and seek forgiveness. Years ago, one of my closest friends, he was also my pastor, and one day he texted me and asked me to do something. He asked something of me, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't tough. It wasn't anything. It was just something simple. But yeah, because I had a victim mind, I interpreted it the wrong way. I took it the wrong way, and I lashed out. I remember texting him back in that moment, telling him, man, I don't want nothing to do with your ministry. I don't want nothing to do with you. And I began to push him away. Remember, a victim mind ruins relationships. And I began to push him away. And every time that I would see him at church, he would greet me. He's always faithful to greet me. And when he did, I responded a few ways. One of the ways I would respond was that little side, hey, and then just keep walking. One of the other ways was just no words, but just keep walking. And then sometimes I wouldn't even respond. I would just ignore him. Other times I would see him up ahead and I would look the other way, pretending like I didn't see him. So immature. This is what a victim mind will do, church. It causes us to be immature in how we deal with people. But then God got a hold of me one day. And I did one of the hardest things I ever had to do, and that was accept personal responsibility. I had to go to him and tell him that I was wrong. That I was wrong for how I viewed things. I was wrong for how I treated him. And I had to stop blaming him and pay attention to those three fingers that were pointed back at me. And that's one of the hardest things I had to do, because I never knew how he would respond. And anytime we ask somebody for forgiveness, we never know how they're going to respond. But that doesn't mean anything. Like, we have to do this by faith. And whether or not how he responded, I knew what I had to do. And I remember going up to him and asking him to forgive me for how I was treating him. And I began to tell him, like, when you asked me this is how I interpret it. He stopped me. He was like, Ruben, I have nothing against you, bro. He's like, I have nothing against you. He's like, I still greeted you, but I was giving you space to work out whatever you had against me. And I'm so thankful that he responded that way and that I did what I did, going to seek forgiveness from him, because it restored our relationship. And we picked up where we left off. He continued to mentor me, continued to teach me, and pour into me. And on one of the biggest days in my life, the day when I got ordained here, he flew out to be with me and celebrate with me on that day. But that would have never happened had I never gone before him and asked for forgiveness. That would have never happened had I not accepted responsibility and stopped blaming others. Forgiveness is a huge part of restoring relationships, guys. And it's hard. I get it. It's tough. We don't want to do it. We're not ready. Ready has nothing to do with it. We do this by faith. So, church, let's put on the victor's mind. And let's make things right by forgiving others and by seeking forgiveness.